So the web part that we just created in the last demo really has only one advantage over the equivalent user control, and that's that you can use the browser to place it on a page. What would be better is if we could provide it some configurability. And the web part framework does allow us to do that via customization and personalization. The customization is what allows all users who have the design permission to make modifications to a web part page that are visible to all users. So to advertise or to let people know that a web part property is available for customization, we have to use the personalizable attribute. So it's with parameter of personalization scope.shared. Now, personalization allows the user to make modifications to a page that only the user can see. And to personalize the page, the user selects personalize this page from the welcome menu. And that's using personalization scope.user. So to decorate your web part with this, you'd use the personalizable attribute again, but in this case you would specify personalization scope.user. So the way the properties work in web parts for customization is that create a public property on our web part and you just decorate it with the personalizable attribute. Personalizable will control the personalization scope. If it's web browsable, then that will cause the property to show up in the web part editor. So when you go to edit the web part, then you'll see it. And then the web display name, that's used to, let's say if you have a non-user friendly property name, this allows you to rename it and make it something more friendly. And same thing with the description, allows us to actually add a description to the property that'll show up in the UI. And then category is important because it allows us to group related properties in the web part editor. So the web part editor, if you don't do anything, it's just going to end up in miscellaneous. But if you want users to know there's a specific category of properties for your web part, you can just create your own category and then the web part editor will take care of that, with rendering that. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to take the existing web part that we've been working on, and we're going to add some properties to it and expose that to the web part editor. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to add a property to our web part. So we're going to add a property for which list we're going to be using, either the fruits or the birds. So let the user change it, make it configurable. So I'm going to create a public property here. Actually, I'll use a snippet here. So this is going to be a string, and I'm just going to call it list. Next thing we need to do is we need to decorate it with the attributes that we want. So use personalizable. So we'll make it personalizable. We'll say web browsable true, because we want it to show up when the editor is opened up. So web display name, again, this is to give it a user-friendly name, so we'll say birds or fruits. And then a description. Again, this is going to be showing up in the UI. Change the list. And then category, we'll just call it configuration. Okay, now, since we're making this more configurable, let's go down to create child controls. And let's do this. Add some more logic. So we're just adding logic there in case the user doesn't initialize the property. We're just going to go ahead and give it the value fruits. And then let's do this here. We'll say so if they specify fruits, we'll use the fruits otherwise. We'll use the birds array. And we'll just modify this here. So just making that a little bit more flexible, more configurable. And I'm just going to reuse the same in the button click event. We'll put this here. Probably should refactor that into a method, but for now we'll leave it like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and deploy this again. And we'll open up the home page. Okay, so let's go into the edit the page. And we're going to edit the web part. So I'm going to minimize appearance. Notice how we have this configuration category now. That's one that we created. And then here's our property, fruits. So we'll change that to birds. You have to type it exactly because we don't have any type of validation here. We don't have a drop-down box or anything like that, so it just has to match. Click OK. And then I'll save that. And we have a bug here. We forgot to change the label here, but that's okay. We can change that real quickly, but the birds did show up here, so our label should be bound to this .list. And this one here should be this .list. deploy that. Start this up again. So now you can see birds are showing up here because that's what's saved in the web part. So let's go back to edit. We'll edit the web part. We'll go back to configuration and we'll type in fruits. Say OK. And notice how everything just changed to fruits. Now, the important thing to remember right here is that that change that was made, the properties of this web part are being persisted in the SharePoint content database. So that's the added value that SharePoint is adding to the web parts. So it's using the ASP.NET web part framework, but now it's adding this storage capability to store the metadata of the web parts. Okay, once all of the child controls exist and then ASP.NET applies the view state, then it's safe to act on the user input and change the properties of your child controls. The place we do this is in the onPreRender method. So when onPreRender happens, all the controls are fully loaded on the page. The view state's been loaded. All the control values are current. And the view state is not saved and it can still be changed. So if you're going to change properties of controls, then onPreRender is the right method to do that. And if you need to access a child control before this method fires, you just need to make sure you call the ensure child controls method, and that'll block until all of the child controls have been created. And if you don't do that, you either run the risk of getting old data, or you just get a null reference exception. It's basically your last chance to change properties of controls. So where does this fit in with our web part that we're working on? Well, update control properties based on personalization properties. So we want to, when personalization changes get read from SharePoint and get populated into our web part, that's when we need to change the control properties in our web part. So onPreRender is also a good place to do things like getting data from the database, making web service calls, any type of data binding that you're going to do. So if you're data binding your controls to your whatever data sources that you have. Anything that depends on the state and the values of the child controls. Also, if you have any JavaScript files or JavaScript that you need to register into the page, you're going to want to do that inside of onPreRender. The main takeaway here is when you're using properties in web parts, where people are changing them in the web part editor, we're going to apply the changes that were made in the onPreRender, because if we try to do it before that, we may not get an accurate value. So what we're going to do now is go back to our web part, and we're going to point out a bug, and then we're going to override onPreRender to fix the bug. So one thing I noticed in the web part code is that I forgot to change the toggling here, so I'm going to go ahead and change this, and then we'll test out the toggling. So if the value is fruits, we want to use birds, and if it's birds, we want to use fruits. So I'll go ahead and deploy this. Okay, so now we're going to toggle it. We should see birds show up. We do see birds show up, but the label wasn't changed. So we forgot to toggle the label. But when we toggle it again, we should see fruits show up here. And we don't, because there's a bug. So we need to take a look and see what the bug is and how we can fix that. So I'm going to close this. We're going to do a little bit of refactoring here. Okay, let's take the this data binding out of here. And let's put it in pre-render. Okay, so let's do this. We'll go ahead and deploy this. Let's just make sure this works. And actually, there's something else I forgot to do here. So let's go back to create child controls. You don't need to do the data binding in the create child controls. Take that data binding out. We're just going to do our data binding inside on pre-render. And actually, let's take this out here as well. You don't need that logic inside of create child controls. Well, let's put that back in. Okay, let's make list value. Let's make that scoped at the class. Get this out of here. Let's just refactor that. Those are actually values, not a value, so we'll refactor that down. Now let's try this again. Okay, let's toggle this list. Okay, that's still getting the same problem. That's good. We're going to debug and troubleshoot this. need to do. Let's take this code out here. Put this in pre-render. Take this out. We're duplicating logic there. So now actually let's take this out here. Put that into on pre-render. Now it's getting a little bit more tight. We're having a little bit of the single responsibility principle here with these methods. So on init, we're just initializing these arrays. Create child controls, we're doing exactly what the method says. We're only creating child controls. So we're creating our list box, we're adding that to the tree, creating a label, adding that to the control tree, and then creating a button and wiring up the button click event and then adding the button to the control tree. The button click event, all it's doing is toggling the value of the property now, so not doing anything else. And then on pre-render, which happens after everything else, after on init, after create child controls, and after button click, on pre-render is where we've now put the logic to determine if, first of all, if we have an empty list, then we'll initialize it to fruits. In this case we don't, because we've already initialized it in our page. It's already been saved to the content database. If the list is fruits, then we change the list values to, actually this is incorrect, so this should be fruits, and this one should be birds. So if the list is fruits, we use the fruits list. If not, then we use the birds list. Logic to change it happens here in the button click. And then once we have the correct array set up, then we go ahead and, in fact, what we can do is where is our list of values? We can get rid of this. But that does not need to be a class level variable anymore, so we're going to refactor that down, put that in pre-render, so now if the list is fruits, the array we're going to use is the fruits array, otherwise we're going to use the list values array. So then our data source is set to the right list here. So let's deploy this. Okay, so now let's just verify. We'll go to the page. We'll edit the web part. Make sure we have fruits set up. We do have fruits, so just want to double check and verify that. So fruits are set up, that looks good. If we toggle, we're going to get birds. Let's toggle again. Now we're still not getting anything. So now, let's set a breakpoint. So right now we're in a state of it's set to birds, and we're trying to toggle it to fruits, and we can't. So let's see why not. So I've got breakpoints and on pre-render, and the button click. So let's see what's going on here. So we're going to toggle from birds to fruits. So this is correct. It's set to, this is incorrect. So if we look at this, look at the UI says birds, but the list says fruits. So the reason why that is saying that is because that's how it's stored in the configuration property. So what we have to do, so it's just keeping it on birds. It's just pulling that out every time. So now it's set, well, we set it here. So what we need to change here is our property. Because what we're doing is when we click that button, we're doing a post back. And ASP.NET is stateless. So list property is being lost each time a post back is happening. So when we click toggle list, we're just toggling from the value of the property that is populated from the web part manager, but not what we were seeing on the page. So what we need to do is persist that value across postbacks. So we'll do that here. We'll change our property, and we'll just back it with a with view state. And we'll put our setter here. So the setter is just going to set the value in the view state. So we just have a different backing mechanism that'll persist across these postbacks. Okay, now we'll go to our Solution Explorer, we'll deploy this. Close that down. So we are getting, Web Part Manager is storing fruits, so this is correct. So now we're going to toggle. We have birds. So right now we should have birds but it hasn't been saved yet. So we're going to toggle again. Now we're using view state. Now we're getting the fruits back because we're backing the property with the view state. We refactored our code quite a bit here. So we changed create child controls. We organized the code a lot better. So now the only thing that's happening in create child controls is we're just creating our child controls. The button click, all it's doing is it's just modifying one property with some logic. And then on pre-render is where we're mostly just doing data binding. So we're checking to see if this is the first time this has ever been run. So if the list property has never been set, nobody went into the web editor and set a property, then it would be null or blank. Then we give it a value. Otherwise, if the list was set to fruits, then we make sure that we're using the fruits array. Otherwise, we're going to use the birds array, and then we just data bind. And now we're able to persist the value even across a postback because we're using the view state.